Hi, everyone, and welcome to what we hope is the first of an ongoing series of Presbyterians Today live events. My name is Layden Williams-Burkus, and I am the managing editor of Presbyterians Today magazine and digital publication. A couple weeks ago, we published a PT special feature on our blog called Isolation in the Lone Star State. It focuses on the particular ways isolation and loneliness impact clergy, specifically through the stories of three PCUSA pastors serving congregations in Central Texas. Today, we're having a conversation that goes a little deeper into some of the questions raised in that piece. I'm so excited to introduce our panel to you in just a moment. But first, I want to remind our viewers that if you haven't had a chance to read the piece yet, or if you'd like to revisit it or share it, please do. And you can find it on our blog at presbyterianmission.org/today. And please follow our blog, our e-newsletter, and our Facebook page for future special features and live events and updates on the relaunch of Presbyterians Today magazine and expanded digital publication. With that, let me introduce our panel. First, we have Fred Tangeman, who serves on communications staff of the Office of the General Assembly and is the author of this piece. Welcome, Fred.
Hi, Layden. Great to be here.
Hi. Glad to have you. And then we have the three pastors who are featured in his piece. We have Reverend Monica Thompson Smith, Reverend Maria Vargas Torres, and Reverend Jaciel Hernandez Garcia. Welcome to all of you, and thank you for being here.
Thank you.
I want to get us started in just a minute with a question for each of you individually. But first, I want to let our audience know that we encourage you to participate in the conversation with us through comments and questions on the Facebook live stream. And we'll do our best to address some of those things during our time together. Also, Maria, Monica, and Jaciel, I recognize this piece was written a number of months ago. So if anything has changed about your circumstances in the interim that feels relevant to our conversation today, please feel free to share that with us as well. First, though, Fred, I want to start with a question for you. We originally started brainstorming about this piece, wanting to have something we were calling tough calls, something about the challenging realities that clergy face. So I'm curious what led you to this particular topic of loneliness and isolation, and how did you settle on Mission Presbytery as the focus of your story?
Thanks, Layden. Again, it's great to be here with you all today. I think that one of the things that drew me to this topic of loneliness was just the ubiquitousness of loneliness in American and world society now. We know that the pandemic changed all of our lives, society in every way, kind of imaginable, but it also brought through some through lines and intensified things that we were experiencing before. And loneliness is very much one of those areas. So, as we were looking at the lives of pastors and thinking about what makes their lives unique, but also connects them with folks in congregations to leadership at churches, we thought that loneliness and looking at loneliness from their perspective would be really interesting. And then, why mission? Mission, as we start the article talking about, is just incredibly diverse presbytery, but also a vast presbytery geographically. So you have people who are in cities like Austin, San Antonio, number of churches, but then you have also congregations that are in rural areas. You have small towns, you have large urban centers. And so we thought getting feedback from pastors in those different places would be really interesting. And then you just have diverse composition of pastors within the presbytery. And, some of those we're blessed to have them with us today. So, looking at loneliness and how that informs their work, but also how loneliness is sort of shaping their lives and how they're reacting to it, I think is something that when you and I and Rick Jones were talking about this, we thought that was interesting. Sally Watson, who's the general presbyter of Mission, was the first person I spoke to, and was just wonderful in opening the doors and connecting me to the three folks that we have to speak with today and who are in the article. So without those connections, as with all aspects of Presbyterian life, this wouldn't have happened. And so that made the story for me really come to life.
I agree. Thank goodness for the connectional church, right? And I am really eager later in our conversation to dig into this question of the unique ways that isolation and loneliness impact clergy, but then also how it might uniquely equip clergy to serve others who are struggling with isolation and loneliness. But first, Monica, a question I had for you. You mentioned that your congregation in Luling was an early adopter of Zoom worship during the pandemic, and that this has led folks to connecting to your church from far away. Is this still true now? And what particular gifts and challenges have you experienced having a more virtually connected community?
Yes. Thanks for having us. And yes, we still have some people coming. We're fully hybrid. We still do it on Zoom. And so we do have some people who come from far away, people who are kind of isolated in their own contexts and not able to make a more traditional connection with any congregation that's close to them. And so sort of vague connections led them to us, and we're really grateful for that. The gift of that has been, just like with any new person in your community, they bring new insights and new gifts to our place. And we've tried to be pretty flexible in how we can use those new perspectives and new gifts and how they can enrich us. The challenge is that we're having to learn new ways to help. Like normally we would be offering things like, I can take you to that doctor's appointment, or, the proverbial casserole. And so we've had to think through things, think through different ways to help, ways that aren't quite so, I don't know, incarnational and embodied, but different ways that we can be community for each other.
Thank you. Yeah, I recognize that catch-22, that digital community allows so much more connection across distance and in difficult circumstances, but is a new way of doing things and requires new approaches to ministry. Maria, a question for you. You said that you spent years working in a hospital setting before shifting to your current parish ministry work. How have your encounters with loneliness and isolation, both your own personally and others, been similar or different between these two settings?
Yes, thank you, Leighton. I understand loneliness and isolation as meaning the opposite of connection. And thereby, it's not just about having or not having company. What's really needed is that vital sense of connection that you can experience in the company of others, through your faith, with a pet, and even with nature. In a hospital setting, for example, there can be many factors that contribute to that sense of isolation, and not just the physical, like the walls of an isolation room, or the use of protective gear by staff to prevent the spread of disease, and also the limitation that is placed on visitors can be limiting factors. But there can be other factors as well that might not be so obvious or even noticeable, like, for example, a language barrier. I remember working in the ICU and seeing a patient's daughter arrive at the end of my shift, and I greeted her and I let her know that I would check on her and her mother when I arrived in the morning. The daughter would be spending the night in the ICU with her mother, who was the patient, and both were Spanish speaking only. So when I arrived in the morning, I checked on them, and I noticed that the daughter was very sad and tearful, and I asked her how she was, and she said, "Don't you know? Didn't you see that sign on the door?" And when I took a look, the sign on the door said fall risk, which means that the patient was at risk for falling. And the daughter, in her limited understanding of the English language, understood that the sign meant that her mother was close to dying. So I shared that with staff, of course, and they were very sensitive to what had happened. And they would be taking the necessary steps to call an interpreter and use the services of an interpreter in communicating with the patient and with family in these situations, which can bridge that gap and establish that much needed connection. So similar issues can also occur in the congregation in a parish setting, and we need to be sensitive and listen. And just by taking the time to listen, and we show that we care, and that tends to work well.
Thank you. I appreciate that. And I something else you said that came up in the piece that I appreciated was the particular ways that small towns understand the importance of connection and showing up for each other. And I think that's a good point for people to realize that that is one place that we can look to, actually, those of us in more urban environments who probably assume that we have connection all around us in a way that small towns don't, when really maybe it's a little bit the opposite. So thank you for that. And Hasiel, I wanted to ask you, I thought something interesting in the piece that you mentioned was the unique experience of isolation that comes from returning to a previous home, because you went back to Kerrville for your current call after having attended college at Schreiner, I believe. Can you share a bit more about that sort of unique experience? And I'd also like to hear, I know you said you were aiming to try to build more ecumenical relationships in the cooler months. And now that we're there, sort of, I would like to hear how that's going for you.
Thank you, Leighton. Yes. There's always a difficulty when returning to a familiar place, and that was the case coming to Kerrville. And my wife and I were aware of that situation when we were discerning next steps and taking this call. And ultimately, arriving to Kerrville just feels different because when I was here, I was a college student. The dynamic was vastly different from this new role, right? Being in a pastoral position, and not only that, but also having different responsibilities and different engagements in the community and a different role overall in the church and the community. And so with that change, also there's this kind of this understanding of what is now my role in the community, what is my role in the church, what is my role in how I interact with people beyond these walls. And so with that, that kind of made me think about the isolation that comes to a familiar place, but in a different role, right? And to know the people, to be familiar with the people, but at the same time knowing that the interactions that you're gonna have are gonna be very different from what they used to be. And so thankfully we found a way to develop new relationships and to build kind of expand on how we relate to people in the church and beyond. And we've really enjoyed getting to know the congregation in a new way. And that's been such a gift in terms of overcoming this isolation and learning new hobbies and sharing food and meals and attending events and so forth, and kind of building a new way to be in community with familiar faces has given us this interesting gift of what it means to be um, not so much in isolation anymore, but to really realize that age is just age and you can be friends with anyone. And that's been really amazing in this community. And going back to following up with a question about ecumenical relationships, we're still working on that. It's Kerrville, even though it is um, about 30,000 people, it's still a small town by Texas standards, right? So and so it still feels like a small community. And so we're still building those relationships, reaching out to people, reaching out to Schreiner at the university, and kind of expand our role and to see how we can be better neighbors. And that's something that's also been a gift in this community is people's commitment to becoming better neighbors with the people that we have. And I'll just share this very briefly about how in our block we have about 5 churches, and so around us we have the Baptist church, the Episcopal church, the Catholic church, the Assemblies of God. And so we are 5 churches, and every year we share what it's called a Christmas walk. And so people are welcome from the community to worship at each of these places, and to attend and have different preachers at every church, and to and again, and to start at one church and then move forward, move along the churches throughout the night. And it was a wonderful worship experience in December. That was to see the sanctuary full of people, but also different people. That was amazing.
That sounds really amazing. Thank you for sharing that. And I also like what you said about realizing that age is just a number. I think one of the things church is particularly good at is encouraging people to seek relationships across generations and different life circumstances. But you also mentioned something that is a really good segue into the next question, which is anyone who would like to jump in, please feel free. Which is there are particular challenges that come with being in the role of pastor. You are perhaps viewed differently in relationship to your congregation or the larger community than perhaps someone else would be. So I would love to hear from y'all, and Fred, you too, from your work on this piece. What ways do you think pastors are uniquely challenged by isolation and loneliness as compared to other populations of people? Are there certain realities about the role of pastor that put them more at risk for isolation and loneliness?
I would start by just sharing, that the place of employment is usually the place where we make our friends as adults. And so for pastors, we have that boundary of congregants and friendships. And so it is often challenging to know the difference, and to, especially if you are a solo pastor or you don't have a multi-staff place, then it becomes more challenging. If we don't have the ecumenical relationships, it becomes more challenging. And so there's so many layers that make it more complicated for a pastor to find friendships.
Yes, thank you.
Right. I agree with Hasiel 100%. And I think it's hard to make friends as an adult, period. And so when that avenue is a little bit, not so much closed off, it's just different. That's hard. And the other thing I was thinking is that I am never not a pastor. I mean, in a small community, everybody knows I'm the pastor. And so I'm not ever not the pastor, just like going to the grocery store or the library or the gas station or whatever. But even if I leave my community and go to a bigger town, I don't know. It's like there's a tattoo on my forehead or something. Like people start telling me things, and it's so it's just who I am, not just a part of me, but just who I am. That's how I respond to people. And so I think that makes us weird in a way that other people don't inhabit their roles like we do. And so I think that just makes and anytime you feel weird or odd, that makes you feel a little bit lonelier.
Yes, I think that can be very true.
I agree. I believe that the expectations that others put on the role of a pastor can lead to isolation. And during my CPE training, clinical pastoral education, I learned the importance of self-awareness. And I know that it's not just the expectations that others put on me as pastor, but also the expectations that I put on myself. So yes, I definitely need to practice self-care in that sense.
I think that's a really good point about, it's easy to project it all externally, but y'all have to forgive my dog in the background. She really likes to be close by. But yeah, it is also the expectations we have for ourselves and our role. I should mention I'm also an ordained pastor, not currently serving in a parish setting, but I have in the past, and that's something I struggled with as well. So thanks for saying that.
We have a
You know, yeah, I was going to say, it looks like we have a question for Monica. Oh, this is a good question. So Sally Watson is asking, Monica, you have a double whammy. You're also a pastor's spouse. How do you do that?
This is maybe longer than a Facebook Live session. Yes, I'm married to a Methodist pastor, and I live in the community where he is the pastor. And so I'm also never not the pastor's spouse, and have to be mindful that my friendships there, my relationships there, my actions there reflect not just on me, but on him and on his congregation. And so finding friendships outside the church is really hard, but something I've been working on, and keeping up friendships with colleagues in other places, in other communities, and having plenty of good friends who I texted somebody last week and said I need a shoulder to cry on, and they said, of course. So nurturing and holding on to friendships far away has been really important.
You know, that actually ties in well to what I wanted to ask next, which is, you know, all of you have identified, I think, very well the particular challenges that clergy face, and yet you're doing it, and you're living, and you're finding a way forward in these calls. And so I'm curious, how are you personally getting over those challenges and making friends, developing relationships both in your communities and farther out? I know each of you talked about some of that in the piece, but feel free to mention those things again, and anything else you'd like to add about what helps you deal with those things and find community.
I would start also by related to what we were talking about, Zoom and the fact that we now have the capability to reach out to people so easily. But anyways, so that's been a gift to keep up in touch with some of my friends, and but also something that I shared during the piece was the gift of cohorts, pastoral cohorts, and I'm part of a couple of them, and that's been such a gift to have other clergy that are not only PCOSA but also other denominations. And even though we are not in the same physical location, and we all serve in across the country, that we share similar experiences, and that we have someone that we can ask questions to. These cohorts also have mentors, so we have people that we can also look up for advice and wisdom. And so when there's a hard situation or something that I'm not sure about here at the church, and I can just text someone or ask someone, call someone and say, hey, what will you do in this position? I need someone to help me work through this one thing. And that's been super helpful, especially arriving on this new call, being a first time head of staff and kind of in Texas. So it's been very helpful.
And you specifically mentioned a particular program based in Atlanta, correct? Can you say a little bit more about that?
Right. It is called the Ministry Collaborative, and they are a great group. It's ecumenical, and every year they launch different cohorts for pastors that are at different stages in ministry. And Mark Ramsey is one of the directors, and he does an excellent job, and he's become a good mentor as well. And so this is a great group. The one that I'm a part of is for first time head of staffs, and so we share a lot of commonalities, but also and so having that space to talk to someone, again, it's super helpful. And I really recommend for anyone who's looking for a cohort that is beyond PCUSA, that this is a great place to start.
Thank you for that. And I love that there are some ecumenical options. That wasn't one that I had heard of before, but I do know that our Board of Pensions also has some ways to gather clergy together through Credo and some other programs that can be really helpful as well if you're looking to connect with other Presbyterians. Monica and Maria, what about you guys?
I was assigned a mentor. I received my call about a year and a half ago, and I moved here to Del Rio from Fort Worth. And I was assigned a mentor, Sally Watson, our executive suggested that Reverend Rob Mueller, who at the time was the moderator of the administrative commission that was working with the church in Del Rio to reopen and get things started again. So yes, I found that to be so helpful. And my initial thought was, wow, Mission Presbytery really sets you up for success. And yes, my first steps, my first 6 months, I was under the care and mentorship of Reverend Rob Mueller, who was very sensitive and caring and has still extended his graciousness to me to call on him anytime. And I do. So I'm grateful.
I love that. I do. I feel like sometimes what can be particularly isolating is when you're dealing with, you're in charge and there are struggles and challenges and it's down to you to figure them out. And, having somebody you can bounce ideas off of and work through things like both you and Hasiel mentioned can make such a difference.
Yes. And I compare it to being a new mom. They hand you a newborn baby at the hospital and you're like, where's the manual? I need a help. So yes, it was vital to have that mentorship.
Well, I'm so glad you did. What about you, Monica? I know you mentioned a little bit of this because as Sally said, you have a double whammy, but yeah, where have you been able to find connection?
So over the years, I've been members of a couple of different groups who, meet for continuing ed opportunities, but also I think probably what's more valuable to us is having colleagues and people you can call and catch up and care about. I think what I mentioned in the article was that I'm part of the Ministerial Alliance here in town. Mm-hmm. And so that's some ecumenical relationships. It's particularly helpful to me because I don't live here. So if somebody's in the hospital or I need somebody, kind of immediately, I feel like I could call on any one of them and they would be willing to step in if I needed somebody in time I couldn't be here. So that's helpful to nurture those relationships with the neighbors.
Yeah, that's such an important thing too, is another thing I think sometimes uniquely impacts clergy is when you're serving in a different community than the one that you live in, and trying to build connections and have relationships and community. So I'm glad that you have that resource available to you. And I'm hearing that we have another question coming from our audience from Rick Jones. So he says, I've spoken with pastors that have indicated that during personal struggles, they shared their problems with the congregation and were pleasantly surprised at how the congregation embraced and pastored them. It totally changed the culture of the church. Have any of you experienced that or have heard similar stories? That's a great question. Thanks, Rick. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I can, I think, share a story. So this was 16 years ago because the baby in question is now 16. We had a fairly premature baby. And I mean, there's some things you just have to share because they're obvious to everybody. And that's one of them. So, I went into premature labor on a Sunday morning, which is super exciting for clergy couple. Wow. And so we each called our congregations and they both said, don't worry about it. We'll take care of it. And they took care of worship that morning. And then she was born on Monday. And the personnel chair called and said, take as much time as you need. And then when she comes home, take as much time as you need. And so that really was, I wouldn't say that changed the culture of that church, but it was a reflection of the culture of that church. And I think you have to know your context and know what you're comfortable sharing and what you're not comfortable sharing. And, sometimes we make mistakes on that, but, and to allow yourself to be cared for, but not in a way that compromises your ability to care for the congregation.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. And is that, Hasiel, you brought up earlier the importance of boundaries. And I do think that's, it's easy to say that, but in lived reality, that's, it's a little bit more tenuous figuring out what that looks like from situation to situation. Yeah, I'm curious. Sorry, animal zoo over here. Pastoral and Maria, have either of you encountered situations like that or heard about instances where colleagues have had to sort of renegotiate what boundaries mean?
It's something that I've been working on with my clergy coach has been this particular thing actually. So it's so interesting that this has come up, and something that he has pushed me to really evaluate and to really rethink is how do I express to my congregation when I'm struggling, when I'm having a hard day, how to be more transparent about my boundaries and my capacity, and to say this week is a busy week, is a you know, and this is as much as I can do this week. And so really be honest and more transparent with the people, especially with the session and with those people that I work with closely, and say, this is how much I can do. And this is, again, I use the word capacity because we've been, again, we've been using that. I've been training myself to use that word. And it's been such a gift. And I experienced that this past week at the session meeting. And I said, over the last 4 weeks, we have this many things happening. This is what I'm going to be focusing on. This is all that I can do. And people were super understanding, and they realized, we hadn't had anyone to really name that out loud and to say, I'm going to work on this, but I'm going to push this, next month or in a few weeks.
Yes, I can relate. Certainly, the congregation knowing what I needed even before I said anything. And I remember that I worked the whole pandemic in healthcare, and I responded to my call here in August. I had not gotten sick. I never got COVID. So in December, I got COVID. First time. So I remember I emailed and I let them know how things were going and how things can be worked out in my absence. And to my surprise, I was feeling very weak. I didn't have an appetite. I could call for takeout, but it didn't occur to me. And all of a sudden, there's food being dropped off at my door. And I thought that was wonderful. That, again, that's small town living. That's what people do in a small town. They take over the casserole. But yes, I started to gain strength again after all that nourishing food that they provided for me.
Oh, that's wonderful. I am so glad that you were well cared for. And Rick's question really honestly tied into something I wanted to ask. So y'all have already answered this a little bit. And Fred, you may also have something to share from your research for this piece, but I am interested in, Monica, earlier you talked about calling a friend or a colleague to say that you needed a shoulder to cry on. And Maria, earlier you talked about the importance of self-awareness. And I do think, self-advocacy and self-awareness and taking the initiative are crucial for clergy. But Monica, I believe it was you in the piece that brought up that it can't just be on pastors to do the reaching out and to do the connecting. And so I'm curious about ways that y'all have either experienced or just thought about that individual congregations, but also presbyteries and synods and the denomination as a whole can show up better to support pastors in this regard.
Leighton, I would just jump in real quick to say, I was thinking exactly of that quotation from Monica in the piece when we were hearing Maria speak about her experience with the congregation bringing food to her, and how it's really incumbent on the community around pastors to look after them. And that is not just the local congregation, but that's the work that's being done at mid-councils and by the national church to sort of, prioritize those things. And in the article, we do point out a few things that are happening and a few things that within mission. There's a Pastor Appreciation Sunday that one congregation held, and that from Sally's perspective was a really helpful, meaningful recognition of the unique situation that pastors are in and the unique struggles that they face. But I just wanted to jump in to say that I thought to underline that it's really on everybody around pastors to be looking out for them, and not on them, as Monica says, to be sort of looking out for themselves.
Yes.
Yeah, I agree. I think that it's so important, and it's easy to get stuck in these modes of thinking that very top down thinking. And so the pastor's the boss and in charge and like untouchable and all of this stuff, when really church is meant to be connectional, as we've discussed multiple times, and communal. And even if the nature of the relationships is different, there's still mutual care. Monica or Maria or Hasiel, anything you'd like to add to that?
I'll just say that this is built into our theology and built into our, I'm thinking of the ordination question we all answer, where we promise to be a friend to our colleagues in ministry. And that's questions that elders and deacons answer too, as well as ministers of word and sacrament. And I take that pretty seriously. And so I think me reaching out to a colleague has a high likelihood of being mutually beneficial to me. I've never reached out to a colleague and said, "Hey, do you want to have coffee, or could we meet for lunch?" and have them say, "No, thank you." I mean, they always say yes. People always are happy to be connected. And so it is me taking that initiative, but it's also the response of the other person to also being a friend to colleague in ministry.
Yes, well said.
I believe we're on question 7. Is that correct, Leighton? How can the
how can presbyteries and synods and congregations help support pastors?
Yes, when I was searching for a call, I used the Church Leadership Connection, the CLC, which matched churches with people seeking a call. And my thought was that would be wonderful if we could have something similar to match pastors who have the same interests and the same hobbies, and maybe they could start chatting and maybe do things like hiking, fishing, baking. They could start out as pen pals and progress from there. So that's just one idea that came to my mind when I saw question 7.
I love that idea. Thank you for sharing that. I would like to see that, something like that come to fruition. I think we have another question from the audience. And then after that, probably one more question before we wrap up our time. So this is from somebody named Dana Lindsley. When you are isolated and unable to make connections with others for support, what tools do you use to care for yourself? So digging back into that self-care area.
I'm certainly at a distance because I can't call a colleague and say, let's meet for lunch or coffee, because I'm like 2.5 hours away from San Antonio. The closest church is in Uvalde, but they have not called a pastor yet. So I'm really looking forward to them calling a pastor so I can have someone to connect with and have that relationship of let's meet for coffee. But yes, I make a point of regularly visiting my family, maybe every 6 weeks or so. I still see my doctors in Fort Worth, so I have that excuse to go over and see the doctors and see my family and friends. And of course, we can always call and FaceTime and Facebook. So that's one way that I seek support.
Something that I will add to that and would be I do enjoy spending time outside. So, being outdoors, especially in Texas, especially in Kerrville, when we have so many days of sunny days, and so to be able to be outside and maybe this isolation becomes less so when making a connection with a stranger or just being friendly to someone and being able to just feel like you're still part of a community. And so to me that's been the one gift to go to we have a river trailhead that we trail that we have here in Kerrville. And so just to go there, walk the dogs, and make friends with people that I don't really know has been really, again, a gift.
That's great. And it does kind of hit on the, I found this, sometimes it sounds obvious, but just literally getting out of the house, putting yourself out in the world sometimes and remembering that it's out there makes such a difference.
Yeah.
I want to ask one final question that I'd love for all four of you to have a chance to answer as kind of our closing, which is, my sense is that pastors take their own experiences and turn them around to help them better minister to others. And so with that in mind, and with your own encounters with isolation and loneliness as pastors, I'm curious what you've learned about how both clergy themselves, but also churches and the larger denomination can show up for anyone, so not just clergy, anyone in their communities who is struggling with isolation and loneliness and feeling disconnected. How can we better serve people? Because as Fred mentioned from the top, this is a national epidemic. This is happening to people of all walks of life, and the church has a call to respond.
One thing I'd offer is that, from the perspective of somebody who's not a pastor, it's important that we connect the dots between the church conversation and the societal conversation. And I think Presbyterians like to do this, and it's what should happen, where we identify something in the church and we see how it has, again, connections with wider society. I was watching a piece on PBS about loneliness. I don't know if anybody has seen this recently, but in this piece they talked about other nations that have identified loneliness as such a health concern that they have ministers of loneliness at the cabinet level of nations. I think the UK has a minister of loneliness, and similar roles in countries, I think Japan and Sweden were mentioned. So I think this is one of those areas to use our voices as Presbyterians to bring about change across society, to bring about an awareness that this is a mental health concern, a health concern in general for people, and that we need to be talking with Presbyterians and others about that aspect of it as well, inside the sanctuary, but also outside of it.
Amen.
Expanding on that, I would add that how do we see isolation and loneliness as a real thing and to take it seriously? Because sometimes we dismiss it as maybe, they're going to be fine on their own. We don't have to go and visit people. We don't have to go and see them. And to really see that this is like Fred said, that this is an actual thing, and that we churches, we people need to treat it seriously and build ways that we can address it in a fruitful manner that allows for better connections, and not to say, well, if they can logging online, then that's great, that's a solution, but really to expand beyond that and to make them feel that they belong to a group, to a community.
Well said.
And I'll say that this is maybe a small thing, but I think the church, pastors in particular, can claim our location and the authority it gives us to be nosy, to ask how are you doing, and actually want to hear the answer. I every once in a while, I'm the recipient of a text or a phone call that says, "Hey, you just popped in my mind and I decided I would call," and how good that feels. And so I've tried to pay attention to when people just pop into my mind, knowing that it's the Spirit putting them there, and tried to do the same, to reach out and say, "Hey, how are you? You just popped in my mind today." And I think having the pastoral role gives us a little bit more leeway to do that, and I think we should claim that.
That is such a good point. Thank you for saying that. I really, permission to be nosy. I like that.
I agree. I think we need to be intentional about the topic of loneliness and isolation, because some people might not feel open about sharing. I know I don't always feel open or comfortable sharing my feelings, and I admire Monica's openness and her ability to share. But I know I'm not like that, and I know that there are others who are like that. So for that reason, I'm open and I share from the pulpit. If anybody needs some time along with the pastor, would like a call, would like a visit, please let me know. And also in the hospital setting, we had online learning modules and incentives about health topics such as these. So that can also be a possibility of offering online learning.
I love that idea. And I think you're right about the difference it makes just to make yourself available to people as well. That is all the time we have for our conversation today, which is too bad because this is so important. And I feel like there's a lot more that could be said. But I'm so grateful for our conversation today. And I know I got a lot out of it, and I hope others did too. So Fred, Monica, Maria, and Hasiel, thank you again for being with us and for sharing your thoughts and stories so openly. Please know that it's helping people and that it's so crucial to do that. And thank you to our audience for joining in. As a reminder, you can follow our blog at presbyterianmission.org/today, where you can also sign up for our monthly e-newsletter. It just comes out once a month. If you'd like to stay abreast of updates. And you can also find us on Facebook at facebook.com/Presbyterians Today and on Instagram at Presby_today. So stay tuned for more information on future special features and live events and updates on the relaunch of our print magazine and our new expanded digital presence, which we're very excited about. And please spread the word about this conversation today, the piece, and the work we're doing at Presbyterians Today in general. Thank you again, and have a great day.